Welcome to Excelsior 32, the online news source for the Excelsior Project from the New York Council of Deliberation.
Welcome to Excelsior 32, the online news source for the Excelsior Project from the New York Council of Deliberation. Ancient accepted Scottish Rite, Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The experiences, comments, opinions, and views shared on this program are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, concordant, or appendant body.
Very good. Could you introduce our speaker for the evening?
I shall. Our speaker tonight, Brother Jeff Croteau, is the Director of Library and Archives for the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library in Lexington, Massachusetts, where he has worked since 2007. And as the museum's librarian, he is responsible for acquiring books and periodicals, cataloging, and providing reference services. He also frequently writes about the library's collection for the museum's blog and various other publications. He earned his Master of Library Science, that's the MLS, degree from Queens College in New York City, and Master of Arts, MA in English from the University of New Hampshire.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you all for having me here today. I'm very happy to speak with you all, and it's great to see some familiar names and some familiar faces. I have a PowerPoint presentation with a lot of images, and I am going to start sharing that now. Okay, great. So again, thank you for having me here this evening. I'm very happy to talk about the Van Gordon Williams Library and Archives at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library in Lexington, Massachusetts. My presentation today is going to begin with an overview of the museum itself, and then more specifically, I'm going to focus on the library and archives and the resources that the library and archives makes available. And before I start, I just wanted to give a brief background about myself before I start. So I'm the director of the library and archives, but I also serve as the library's librarian. And I have been in the museum field, the museum library field, for 25 years. And 15 of those years have been at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. And as the intro indicated, I actually received my library science degree in New York, and I got my start in libraries in New York City. I worked at the Brooklyn Museum's Library and Archives in Brooklyn, New York, starting in 1997, and then eventually made my way up to Massachusetts and ended up at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. And I'm enthusiastic about the library and archives collections, and I'm hoping that I can share some of that enthusiasm with you this evening, as well as sort of let you know what we can do to help you. So just to tell you a little bit about the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. It was established in 1975 by the Scottish Rite Freemasons of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library tells the story of Freemasonry and fraternalism in the context of American history. Unique in the nation, the museum aims to be the historical society of American Freemasonry by collecting, preserving, interpreting, and celebrating the history of fraternalism. And we pay special attention to the history of the Scottish Rite, and we strive to serve the Masonic community. The museum's collection related to American Freemasonry, fraternalism, and American history numbers more than 17,000 objects. The museum also manages an additional 11,000 objects and documents from the collection of the Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts under a long-term loan agreement. Now, when most people think about museums, they think about its exhibitions, and our museum is no exception. The museum has hosted over 300 exhibitions in its 47-year history. We present changing exhibitions that explore topics related to Freemasonry, fraternalism, the Scottish Rite, and the history of our nation. The museum has made a number of online exhibitions available. These can be found through the museum's online exhibition site, and the Library and Archives Digital Collections website, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a little bit, also features online exhibitions. This one shown here features illustrated patriotic envelopes of the American Civil War. And this one highlights certificates, membership certificates from our collection. And shown here is an 1845 handwritten certificate declaring New Hampshire's John Christie an active member of the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction Supreme Council. And I just love this document. The entire thing is handwritten and hand-drawn. We also have an online exhibition that focuses on a single document, the 1775 Lexington Alarm Letter. And this particular copy of the letter that's in our collection and we've digitized and interpret through this online exhibition was written in the late morning of April 20th, 1775, and was one of several that were created by colonists to inform distant communities and colonies about the Battle of Lexington and the outbreak of war with England. Like many other museums, our museum is active on social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr. And the museum's blog deserves special mention here since it's been around for a long time. Since 2008, staff have posted stories about recent acquisitions, discoveries, and other news several times a month on the Museum and Library's blog. So I could say plenty more about the museum itself, but I am here to specifically talk about the library and archives. And I just want to mention briefly, this photograph is a recent photograph of the Library and Archives reading room. And if any of you have visited us before, but not recently, it may look very different. We were very grateful to Rich Elliott, the museum's executive director, who made it one of his projects early on when he came on board a year and a half ago to renovate the library and archive space. And it's really been a fantastic improvement. The space is much cheerier and welcoming and spacious feeling. And it's really been a great improvement. So I just wanted to highlight that since it's nice for me to see a new picture of the library when I do this presentation. So the Van Gordon Williams Library and Archives is one of the premier repositories in the United States for the study of Freemasonry and fraternalism. Its other major collecting area is American history. We are open to the public, and the Library and Archives is located right off the museum's main lobby. The Library and Archives has one of the world's most comprehensive collections on the subject of American Freemasonry. And I'm going to take a few minutes now to talk a little more in depth about specific parts of the Library and Archives collections and sort of do a little bit of an overview to begin with. So the collection comprises over 65,000 books, over 1,000 serial titles, and 2,000 cubic feet of archival materials related to Freemasonry, fraternalism, and American history. The library's Masonic collection includes primary and secondary sources related to Freemasonry dating from the 18th century to the present. The Masonic Rare Book Collection has some of the most important Masonic titles published in English, including the first Masonic book published in North America, which is pictured here, and that is James Anderson's The Constitutions of the Freemasons, printed by Benjamin Franklin in 1734. So this is one of only around 20 copies that survive of the 1734 printing of Anderson's Constitutions that were printed by Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia. And it's a real treasure in our collection. The library also has an extensive American history collection that includes material related to fraternal, by which I mean non-Masonic fraternal organizations. So fraternal groups, decorative and applied arts, historical maps, and sheet music, just to name a few of these subject areas. So if you're interested in ritual, we have the most comprehensive collection of material related to the Scottish Rite degree rituals of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The best sources to consult in order to learn about the changes, revisions, specific details, etc., with regard to the NMJ degree rituals is the text of the rituals themselves. The Library and Archives has a collection of at least one print or digital copy of every approved Northern Masonic jurisdiction degree ritual from 1867 through the present. And as you may know, The Northern Masonic jurisdiction rituals have been revised extensively over the 200 years of the jurisdiction's existence. For example, the Supreme Council's Ritual Committee has approved 271 separate rituals between 1867 and 2016. So that means of the 29 Scottish Rite degrees, there's 271 separately approved rituals. So there's almost 10 of each of them, although the average is out that way. And we have many more rituals as well. I'm just highlighting the Northern Masonic jurisdiction rituals. The archives collections are comprised of the institutional archives of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite's Northern Masonic jurisdiction, which date back to the 18th century, as well as a number of other important collections pertaining to Freemasonry, fraternalism, and American history. Also part of the archives collection is the archival portion of the Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts extended loan. Pictured here is an engraved Masonic summons issued by the Lodge of St. Andrew in Boston in 1768. And not only was the summons printed and sold by Paul Revere, but it is also signed by Revere in his capacity as secretary of the Lodge of St. Andrew. And this summons is a great illustration of the entrepreneurial overlap between the Revere the businessman and Revere the dedicated Freemason, who would, nearly 30 years after this summons was printed, go on to become Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And if you come and visit, there's a good chance I'm going to take this document out and show you the real thing in person, because it's a real crowd pleaser. The Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite's Northern Masonic Jurisdiction Collection includes founding documents of the organization, including many which predate its official founding in 1813. Highlights of this collection include correspondence of early officers of the Supreme Council, documents related to the Union of 1867, which consolidated two previously competing Supreme Councils to the current day Northern Masonic Jurisdiction Supreme Council, and over 500 manuscript rituals from the 18th and 19th centuries, including the 1783 Franken manuscript. And pictured here is another one of my favorite documents. This is a completely hand-drawn certificate issued to Nathaniel Shurtleff, who was the mayor of Boston. And this was issued by the Supreme Council Northern Masonic Jurisdiction for their, quote, their high appreciation of the most cordial and fraternal welcome extended to them by Shurtleff during the Supreme Council's annual meeting, which was held in Boston in June of 1869. So this was in June of 1869, Supreme Council had its annual meeting in Boston, and this wonderful, completely hand-lettered and hand-drawn certificate was issued to Nathaniel Shurtleff as the mayor of the city of Boston for thanks to him for hosting the Supreme Council's annual meeting. But additionally, at the same time, Shurtleff was also an active member of the Supreme Council, and he was also its Grand Keeper of the Archives. And if you look in the middle of this, it says Nathaniel B. Shurtleff. Before his name, it says illustrious brother, and after it says GKA, which stands for Grand Keeper of the Archives. Highlights of the Masonic and fraternal collections include member certificates, charters, ledgers, minute books, programs, correspondence, as well as ephemera, such as, the collection also includes Masonic and fraternal manufacturers' regalia catalogs, over 8,000 Masonic and fraternal postcards. And pictured here is one of the manufacturer's regalia catalogs. This is a wonderful Henderson Ames Masonic regalia catalog from about 1920 that is in our collection. And as you can see, it features a great depiction of Hiram Abiff on the cover with his square and compasses held high over his head. And my colleagues and I think this is a very sort of rock star pose for Hiram Abiff. The Grand Lodge of Massachusetts collection numbers approximately 11,000 objects and documents. The archival portion of the Grand Lodge extended loan includes approximately 200 18th century letters, 200 photographs, and 900 Masonic certificates, as well as other material. Pictured here is an 1830 broadside, sort of a poster, announcing an anti-Masonic lecture by Avery Allen, and this is in the Grand Lodge collection. And Avery Allen was a very prominent anti-Mason during the late 1820s, early 1830s, and he not only did he publish a Masonic ritual exposure, but he also publicly performed what he called Masonic ritual to a paying audience. And this is a poster advertising one of these performances, if you will. Highlights from the U.S. History Collection include the Galford Collection of World War I and World War II posters, the Ace Family Collection of material pertaining to teenage hobos in America, and the G. Edward Elwell Jr. Collection of autographs. One of the gems of the U.S. History Collection, I highlighted this earlier through the online exhibition, is our Lexington Alarm Letter, which I'm showing here again. This letter written on April 20th, 1775, which carried news of the Battle of Lexington that had taken place the previous day in Lexington, and was the first battle of the American Revolution. And we take this out, so the actual document itself, for the most part, lives in our, or it doesn't live, it is stored in our special collections vault. And once a year around Patriots Day, which is a holiday in Massachusetts, which is around the time of the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington, April 19th, 1775, we take this out for about a week or so, and this is on view. The original document is on view in our lobby to visitors who stop by. So it's a really special object. I'd like to take a few minutes now to talk a little bit about how to find our material online. So the best way to find out what is in the library's collection is to consult our online catalog. And for those of you who are old enough to remember card catalogs in libraries, the online catalog is the digital equivalent of the card catalog. It tells you what books, periodicals, and other material the library has, but it does not contain digitized material. The catalog contains the holdings of the library's collection with an increasing number of records for archival items and collections. And you can access our online catalog through the museum's website. And just today, this came up. I was talking to the museum's archivist, John Coelho, and we've got some software in place that we are working with now to try to get more of the archives material available online, at least catalog information about the archives material. So I'm hoping that in the next year or so, you'll see more access to information about our archives collections, although there is some information within our online catalog currently. So back in 2015, we created the Van Gordon Williams Library and Archives Digital Collections website to share a selection of our digitized collections online. And I should emphasize, when you go to the site and you look around, that all of this digitized material is just a small fraction of the physical material we have. So this is really the tip of the iceberg. And if you're wondering if we have something, and you've looked at our digital collections website, and you've looked in our online catalog, and you're still wondering, maybe they have this thing, you should feel free to get in touch with us, and we can certainly tell you one way or the other whether we have the type of resource you're looking for or the specific resource that you're looking for. But we have made a lot of material available online. We have digitized nearly 1,000 items from the archives collection and have made them available through this website. And all of the digitized items are available as high-resolution images. So you can really zoom in on these images and get a close look at them. And they're all cataloged so that you can, they're easily searchable and you can actually find the material, because scanning the material is not even half the battle. Cataloging the material so that people can find it is another big part. And a lot of the work, I should say, that was done getting the material into the digital collections website was done by John Coelho, the museum's archivist. Material on this website can be found through the search function, or by browsing through the items, or viewing sort of collections of material that are brought together by the type of the material. So all the Masonic membership certificates that we've digitized, or sometimes we group them by themes, such as the American Civil War. So there are currently 12 separate collections on the site. The letter you see here was written by President Harry Truman to then Sovereign Grand Commander Melvin Johnson in 1945. And you can see it's written on White House letterhead. And you can also see that Harry Truman, in a very friendly manner, refers to Sovereign Grand Commander Melvin Johnson as Dear Mel. So they were very, very friendly with each other. And this is one of 14 letters from from Truman to Johnson that we have digitized and made available. And in the letter shown here, Truman gives permission to schedule Truman's Gorgas Medal presentation at the White House. And as you may know, the Supreme Council awards the Gorgas Medal to Freemasons in recognition of distinguished service to Freemasonry, the country, or humanity. And President Truman was the first recipient of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction's most distinguished honor. And this was a little behind the scenes look at scheduling the ceremony where Melvin Johnson would present the Gorgas Medal to Harry Truman at a White House event, at the White House, I should say. The other 6 collections available on our digital collections site are highlighted here. The Masonic Membership Certificate Collection is especially rich, with over 250 certificates covering a span of nearly 250 years. The certificate shown here is one of the oldest in our collection and may actually be the oldest. It is a Master Mason certificate issued by Philadelphia Lodge No. 2 to a man named James Harding in 1756. And I'd like to take a little time now to highlight a few of these collections in order to give you a sense of the type of material you can find in some of these collections. I've highlighted a couple of individual pieces here, but I just wanted to talk a little more about some of the documents you can find. So for those that are interested in the history of the Scottish Rite, we have digitized about 120 documents related to the Scottish Rite with a specific focus on the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And the documents pictured here, I'll just tell you what they are briefly, going from left to right. So on the far left, that is a letter from the Southern jurisdiction's Sovereign Grand Commander, Moses Holbrook. It is a letter that he wrote to John James Joseph Gorgas, of whom the Gorgas Medal is named after, in 1827. So we have a lot of correspondence in our collection between Gorgas and Holbrook. Gorgas was not, was Gorgas I can't remember if Gorgas was actually Sovereign Grand Commander at the time, or he may have been Grand Secretary General, but he was basically the person who single-handedly kept the Northern Masonic jurisdiction together during the anti-Masonic period in the late 1820s. He kept all the documents together. He was still corresponding with the members even when there was very little activity going on. And he corresponded a lot with Moses Holbrook of the Southern jurisdiction, which was then located in Charleston, South Carolina. And they write about all kinds of interesting things because these letters are very personal. They're talking about what's going on in their lives. They also talk about the state of Freemasonry where they are. And then they get into very interesting things where Moses Holbrook, for example, says, we lost a lot of our rituals in a fire in 1819, and we really need help rebuilding our rituals. And so through reading this correspondence, you can see that Gorgas talks about how he's going to send, and of course at the time, these were all handwritten rituals. These were not printed rituals. Some notebooks essentially that had the rituals in them, and he was going to send them down to Charleston so that Holbrook could copy them out by hand and make his own copies so that they would have copies of the rituals. And they even talk about specific things such as, I'm going to put it on this specific boat because there are these packet ships that went down the coast that delivered mail relatively quickly at the time. And they talk about this specific boat that has a captain who is known to be a Mason, and he could be trustworthy. And so they sort of talk a lot about sort of safeguarding this material as it makes its way between New York City and Charleston, South Carolina in the 1820s. So it's a really interesting story of cooperation. We have digitized just a few of these to make them available through the digital collections website, but they even one or two letters gives you a really good flavor of this correspondence. The second one, second from the left, that is a general convocation certificate issued by J.J. Gorgas to Edward A. Raymond and Charles W. Moore in 1848. The next one over is a dispensation issued by the Supreme Council to form a Rose Croix chapter in Boston in 1845. So a relatively early dispensation that came at a time when Freemasonry, and especially the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, was really rebuilding itself. It really wasn't until 1843, 44, 45 that the Northern Masonic jurisdiction started to sort of come back and start rebuilding itself and being active again after the anti-Masonic period. The next document after that sort of has the gold seal at the bottom That is a certificate appointing Nathan H. Gould as deputy for the state of Rhode Island in 1867. And then the next one, the blue paper, is really kind of a wonderful document. That is a handwritten statement on the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, written in 1865. And this was a resolution by Benjamin Dean, an active member of the Supreme Council, which expressed the Supreme Council's sympathy over the death of the recently assassinated president. So this was something that was written out by the Supreme Council and eventually published in the proceedings, expressing the Supreme Council's sorrow over the assassination of Lincoln. And then the final document on the right-hand side, that is a letter from Sovereign Grand Commander Josiah H. Drummond to John Sheville, who was deputy for New Jersey, and that is from 1870. And as I mentioned earlier, we have digitized over 250 Masonic certificates. And this is also, as I mentioned, just a fraction of the certificates that we have in our collection. We have hundreds of certificates in the Library and Archives collection. And then on top of that, there's the 900 more Masonic membership certificates that are in the extended loan collection of the Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts. And again, I'll just briefly talk about these documents starting from the left. On the left, that is a Royal Arch membership certificate that was issued by Concord Chapter number 1 of Wilmington, North Carolina, to Jeremy Hoadley of Hartford, Connecticut, and that is from 1805. It's a wonderful little certificate that we purchased, I think around, I want to say 5, 6, 7 years ago. Next to that is a Master Mason certificate issued by the Grand Lodge of New York to Thomas Fisher of Mount Moriah Lodge, number 132 of New York City, and this is dated 1820. Next to that, in the middle, that is a Master Mason certificate issued by Independence Lodge, number 76 from Independence, Missouri, to a man named Jacob Rich, and that is from 1849. And what is so wonderful about this, and it may not come across in this image, is this is completely done by hand. So that drawing at the top is completely executed in pen work, and then below the line, all of the writing is also all written out in hand. So it's a really wonderful piece of art, frankly. And then next to that is a 32nd degree certificate issued by Massachusetts Consistory of Boston to a man named Parker Litchfield, and that is from 1868. And then on the far right, that is a Master Mason certificate issued by Garfield Lodge, number 686, Chicago, Illinois, to Jesse Mead, and that is from 1887. So the items in this collection are a selection of documents and ephemera that were created during and often about the American Civil War. And again, going from left to right, as you can see, it says Masonic War Certificate. Masonic War Certificate. That is a Civil War Masonic certificate issued by the Grand Lodge of Illinois to a man named Corporal Phineas Lovejoy, who was a member of Columbus Lodge, number 227 at Adams, Illinois. Corporal Lovejoy served in the 3rd Regiment, Illinois Cavalry, and died on August 9th, 1862, during the Civil War, on board the riverboat White Cloud, somewhere near Memphis, Tennessee. From April 1861 until the end of September 1863, the Grand Lodge of Illinois issued 1,757 of these Masonic War certificates to Illinois Master Masons. So that's a period, April 1861 till the end of September 1863. So that's a little over 2 years. And it was issued to almost 1,800 Masons who were going off to war. And eventually, these were issued to the Sons of Master Masons as a sort of traveling certificate. Next to that, with the sort of star and brown and black stuff at the top, this is a handwritten account by Lieutenant Daniel G. McNamara of the 9th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. And the document certifies the authenticity of the attached flag remnant, which was a piece of the American flag carried by the regiment throughout the Civil War. And the 9th Regiment was an Irish heritage unit, hence Lieutenant McNamara. So that's kind of a wonderful relic, war relic, brought back from war by a member of the regiment that had it, and it includes this note describing the importance of what might look to someone else like something not very interesting or important. After that, the printed document by Rob Morris, that is an undated Masonic Civil War ode by the Masonic poet Rob Morris, entitled "We Swear to be True to a Brother." And then the two envelope-shaped objects in the top right. The top one is a pro-Union American flag envelope that was published during the American Civil War. And this is part of a collection of a relatively large number of patriotic, printed patriotic envelopes from the American Civil War. And these were printed mostly by the Union, to a smaller extent by the Confederacy during the war. And these were collected during the war. Some people used them, but some people also collected them. And in fact, they produced kind of books that you could put these in to collect them. So they were issued somewhat as collectibles during the war itself. And we have, I can't remember the number now, but we have a collection of these. And there's, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, there's an online exhibition, which is based on a small exhibition we had in the library's reading room a few years back, and sort of interpret some of this material to sort of give you a little bit of a background about what these envelopes were, why they were produced, and gives you some highlights from our collection. And the envelope below that, and I don't know if you can read that, but it's got pictures of two men. One has the word traitor stamped on his face, his portrait, and the other one says patriot, and there's an American flag below that. This is a Civil War envelope that depicts presidential and vice presidential candidates. This is John Bell and Edward Everett, who are candidates of the Constitutional Union Party in the 1860 presidential election. So this was originally it did not say traitor and patriot, and it was issued as a campaign envelope to promote the campaign of John Bell and Edward Everett. And it was altered during the Civil War, and the word traitor was stamped over John Bell's image, and the word patriot was stamped below Edward Everett's image. Bell was originally opposed to secession, but after the Battle of Fort Sumter in April 1861, he openly opposed President Lincoln and advocated for Tennessee's secession. And lastly, the document below that, that is the first page of a manuscript letter addressed to the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, requesting a dispensation for opening a military lodge by members of the 14th Regiment New Hampshire Infantry. The letter is signed by Lieutenant Colonel T.A. Barker and others, and a note on the back of the letter, dated October 20th, 1862, is written by Charles H. Bell, who was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, and in his handwriting, he grants the petition and names the lodge Comrades Lodge number 4 of Army Lodges. So as you can see, one thing the museum and library really strive to do when we present material and we interpret material is we really try to contextualize Freemasonry in broader American culture. So you could talk about the American Civil War, you could talk about Freemasonry, and in this case, with a number of these documents, you could talk about both at the same time, and I think it tells you a lot about both. The postcard views of Scottish Rite buildings collection contains a selection of early 20th century postcard views of Scottish Rite buildings in the United States, and it includes both exterior and interior views. And I think I mentioned this earlier in my talk, but we have about 8,000 postcards that have a Masonic that are somehow Masonic related. A lot of them are Masonic buildings, but not exclusively. Some of them document Knights Templar triennials, Shriners conventions, other things that postcards were produced for. And this was a collection we got many years ago before I was ever at the museum and library, and it was put together by an individual whose name escapes me right now, but he essentially created this collection, collected these postcards, and then they eventually came to the museum and library. And pictured here is the Scottish Rite Cathedral, and some of these, of course, one thing that's interesting about these buildings is some of these buildings are still in use. Some of these buildings are no longer in Masonic use. Yeah. Some of these buildings are still in use, of course. Some of these buildings are still in use, but not in Masonic use. And then some of these buildings have been torn down. And so it's sort of a record of these buildings from the time that they were, you could argue, at their height when they were built and supported by a large membership. So there's the Scottish Rite Cathedral in Scranton, Pennsylvania, pictured here. Below that is the Caldwell Consistory Building in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. Of course, in the middle is the iconic Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then the two on the right are from the southern jurisdiction. The one on the top is the Scottish Rite Cathedral in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a very iconic building of architecture that fits into the environment there. And then below that, the Scottish Rite Temple in Miami, Florida. So I'd like to talk briefly about how we continue to collect material for the collection. Since the museum's inception, the Library and Archives has always relied on both purchases and donations to help grow the collection. Our annual acquisition budget allows us to purchase both new books on the subject of Freemasonry, fraternalism, and U.S. history, as well as archival material and rare books that come up at auction or are offered by dealers. A couple of years ago, we purchased 14 documents related to King Cyrus Royal Arch Chapter in Newburyport, Massachusetts. And pictured here is an 1825 invitation from the Grand Royal Arch Chapter of Massachusetts to the subordinate Royal Arch chapters in Massachusetts, inviting them to the cornerstone laying of the Bunker Hill Monument. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Bunker Hill Monument, if you come to Boston and you ever go on the Freedom Trail and take in the historic sites of Boston, you will no doubt encounter the Bunker Hill Monument. And there was a first earlier monument, a smaller monument, which this is related to, and then later they built the obelisk that you see today. But the drawing a crowd of 100,000 people to the site of Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill, just 50 years after the battle, the Bunker Hill Monument cornerstone laying in 1825 was a huge event. So there were 100,000 people there, including a very strong contingent of Masonic representation. Gifts have always been an important part of how we acquire material and continue to acquire material. Thanks to the generosity of individuals, lodges, and other Masonic organizations, the Library and Archives continues to be able to collect, preserve, and make available resources related to Freemasonry. The image shown here is a man named Grenville Hancock's mark. And as you can see, there is a hand and a cock, Hancock. And this is from the Belmont Royal Arch Chapter's Book of Marks, Belmont, Massachusetts. This Book of Marks that this is from a large collection of material from several Royal Arch chapters that was donated to us by Mystic Woburn Royal Arch Chapter here in Massachusetts. And just a side note about this, when I first saw this, I got a chuckle out of it. I thought, that's there are a lot of examples of men who pick marks who basically use a visual pun on their name. And this one I thought was amusing. And I was surprised to find out that going back to at least John Hancock, one of the founding fathers, this combination of a rooster and a hand to represent Hancock was used. So it was not something new at all. This is from 1929, and it's a wonderful illustration. In fact, we were able to do a little research and find out that these books were actually sent out to professional illustrators who were paid to illustrate the marks in this book. And I think it really shows in this example how wonderfully detailed and well executed and just wonderful. This particular mark, which is just one of hundreds, was represented. So going back to start talking about gifts, I want to make sure to say that if your lodge or chapter or valley, or you yourself personally have something that you might be interested in donating to the library and archives, I encourage you to get in touch with me, because we're always happy to talk to people about what they have, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially if they're interested in donating it. We're always happy to talk to people about what they have. But if you are have a question about whether it's something we might be interested in, if you're thinking of donating something, we're always happy to talk to you about it, to see if it's something that we don't have, that we would be interested in having. So never hesitate to get in touch with us. And that goes also for the museum side of things. We have a director of collections and exhibitions, Hillary Anderson Stelling. She is always happy to talk to people about non-library and archives materials that people might be interested in donating to us. So just don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So helping with reference requests, speaking of getting in touch with us, is a big part of what we do at the library and archives. And you should know that we love getting requests. You are not bothering us. We're there for a reason. And part of that reason is to help people find what they're looking for, and take a researcher, whether it's a casual researcher or someone who's working on their PhD dissertation. There's all different kinds of research. It can be a very casual interest in something, and connecting those people with the materials they need to learn more about what they're trying to learn about. If you have a question and you need help, you can feel free to email me, give me a call. Obviously, if you live nearby, you can come in person, but usually an email or phone call is a great place to start. And I'll see what I can do to help. So I've put just a small sample here on the screen, a very small sample of some somewhat recent reference requests that we've gotten, to give you a flavor of the types of requests we receive. And this is by no means representative. This just is a few examples. We receive many different kinds of requests on many different topics. The illustration here was a result of an inquiry that we received a little while back. And what's so great about this is it shows Harry Houdini's Scottish Rite initiation record from the 1924 annual returns of the Valley of New York. So we got a request saying, do you have any documentation showing that Harry Houdini became, a member of the Scottish Rite in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction? Because you can read it online over and over again, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's well researched. It could be that one person said something and then it got repeated many times online. That's not always the case, of course, but the person wanted to know, is there actually documentation at the museum and library showing that Harry Houdini became a member? And sure enough, I went to the annual returns, which we have hundreds of bound volumes of, going back into the 19th century. And here is Harry Houdini listed among all the other men, all the other Masons who became members of the Valley of New York during this same time period. And I got curious about this, and in fact looked up Franklin Delano Roosevelt the same way, because I thought, oh, I should look up FDR and see if I could find him. And sure enough, same thing. FDR is just listed there among everybody else. So it's kind of a wonderful piece of history when you see. I think it's sort of a great leveling message, very Masonic, I think, to have these famous people just listed here among plenty of other people that perhaps we have not heard of. So going back to what I can do to help, sometimes a question just involves me looking something up in a book that we have at the library, which I'm always happy to do. If there's something that I can scan and send along, sometimes someone is looking for a particular article in a Masonic periodical. Usually I can scan that and send the PDF via email. It's very easy for me to do. Or if there's some pages in the proceedings of the Supreme Council that would help answer a question, occasionally a chapter from a book. It really depends on the type of request. But if I can, I'm always happy to help someone remotely. And this was especially true during the pandemic years, and we're not totally out of that right now. So I feel like there's a lot of people who are not necessarily coming by even still, and I'm more than happy to help them out. And of course, the Northern Masonic jurisdiction is dispersed over 15 states. So some of you live nowhere near the museum, and we're always happy to help out if we can remotely. And if you are doing more in-depth research, sometimes coming on site is the only approach. If you're really doing some in-depth research that requires you going through some material on your own, sometimes it does turn into an in-person visit to do that. But if we get researchers who get in touch with us in advance, we pull the books and archival material, whatever they are going to need to look at, we pull that in advance so that when they get there, they can start researching right away, and we can make the best use of their time. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in person down the road, or assisting you remotely, either in the near future or in a year or two when some question comes up and you think, I wonder if they know they can point me to some materials about that at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. Well, give me a call, send me an email. And if I can't find you the answer, I always try to point someone to another institution or another person or someone who can help. It's the rare day where if I can't help you, I'm just going to say sorry. I'm usually going to point you to someone who I think, to someone or some institution that can help you. So we have a number of brochures that are at the museum, and these are also available as PDFs. So this one on the left, Caring for Your Masonic Treasures, this one is only available as a PDF. This is sort of an introduction to people who are caring for, mostly this deals with paper-based material. So there's so many lodges, chapters, valleys, people are suddenly look at their material and they say, I don't think we're doing the best job taking care of this, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Well, the museum, the professional museum staff put together this booklet as a way to get you started, to basically say, here are the things you need to think about. Here are some resources that you can go to online that will give you more information. We, of course, are always happy to help out if you call and say, I have a charter, I'm not sure that we're storing it properly, can you tell us what to do? We're always happy to help with that. And specifically with charters, I should mention the museum and library has a program by which we store on extended loan Masonic charters free of cost. So this came up, especially in a state like Massachusetts, where you have lodges that have charters that were chartered by Paul Revere. So they have a charter from the 1790s that was signed by Paul Revere, and understandably, the members of the lodge get nervous, thinking, we don't want something to happen to this. We want to make sure that we take care of it. We're the caretakers of this charter right now. And so we've made this program available where basically we store it in our climate controlled vault. It's on extended loan, of course, so you still own, the organization still owns the charter because you can't give it to us. And then if you need the charter back, the charter can be loaned back for an inspection or any reason that you might need it back. And we're always happy to help with that. But the Caring for Your Masonic Treasures booklet sort of goes over the basics of, what sort of things should I be thinking about if I'm thinking if my material is stored properly? And if that doesn't help you out enough, like I said, there's contact information in the back of that to get in touch with museum and library staff where we can help you further. And then these last three brochures, the next one is Connect with Our Collection. This is related to digital collections, social media, and online resources related to the museum as a whole. The next one over is specifically about the Library and Archives digital collections site that I went into a fair amount of depth with you this evening. And then the last one highlights services for the Masonic community that the museum and library provides, including the charter storage program that I was just talking to you about. So if you're interested in any of these, there's my email address is on the last slide, which I'm about to go to. And you can just send me an email and I would be happy to send you these as PDFs, or if you want physical copies, I can put them in the mail to you. I would be happy to do that. It's not a problem at all. So again, many thanks for your time. It's been great to talk to you about the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library, and specifically about the Library and Archives collection. And I would be happy to take any questions that you might have, and I can try to answer them right now, or if I can't answer you right away, I can certainly get back to you with an answer. Thank you.
Jeff, that was phenomenal. Thank you very much. So Peter Flehan just put in the chat, if you'd like to chat in a question, if you'd like to also now turn on your video, you can certainly do that. And if you'd like to ask a question to the group live, that's okay too. And we'll monitor the chat to make sure that we ask Jeff those questions.
Jeff, it's Steve Stefanakis. I have one for you.
Sure.
I can't turn my video on, but can you please explain to everybody, I think in the past couple of years, one of the most important things that the library has done is publish and put together the Franklin manuscript, and it was done in such painstaking detail. Can you please explain to everybody the process that the museum went through, and you as the librarians and everything you did to put that together? Because it's like I said, probably the most important piece that we own in the Scottish Rite.
That's a great question. I'd love to. So for those of you, and make sure you look at Rick. He is holding up the book itself, the facsimile book that was published by the Supreme Council in 2017. So briefly, the 1783 Franken manuscript is a manuscript in book form that contains the earliest English language versions of rituals, which became Scottish Rite rituals. So the Scottish Rite was founded in 1801, but some of the rituals that were brought into the Scottish Rite when it was founded in 1801, some of those rituals predate the actual founding of the Scottish Rite. So the Franken manuscript is called the Franken manuscript because a man named Henry Andrew Franken was a deputy inspector general of a rite that was called either the Order of the Royal Secret or the Rite of Perfection, and it contained degrees the degree system was 4 through 25, and the Lodge of Perfection was essentially imported right into the Scottish Rite as it was. Degrees 4 through 14 came right into the Scottish Rite, and if you look at they won't look a lot like today's old Lodge of Perfection degrees, but if you look at 19th century Lodge of Perfection degrees and compare them to the Franken manuscripts, they'll be very, very similar. So the book itself that was published by the Supreme Council in 2017, what it contains is a photo facsimile of the entire Franken manuscript. And on one page, you have an image of the manuscript. And then on the facing page, you have a transcript of that, because some of the handwriting is a little hard to read, but the facing page has the text of the ritual, and there are footnotes as well that help explain some of the terms that come up, which may not be familiar to Masons today. And I was involved with this project, and it was wonderful. I mean, it really is one of the gems of the collection. And when people come to visit, I love to bring this out because if you're interested in the history of the Scottish Rite, and if you're interested in the history of ritual in the Scottish Rite, there's a reason that ritual geeks get excited about the Franken manuscript, because it's really the sort of the core text from which everything spawned afterwards. And I wrote there's a few essays in the front of that book as well that are really interesting. I wrote one that's about the history of ownership of that book, because it's got a really interesting history of who owned that book. When I first started working, so I've been at the museum for 15 years. When I first started there and I learned about this Franken manuscript that we had, I assumed that this has been in the collection for a long time. But in fact, when you start to learn about the provenance, the history of ownership, you discover it didn't come to the Supreme Council until 1935. And there's this really interesting story of who owned it before and how it eventually ended up back at the Supreme Council and then under the care of the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. But I won't tell you about that, because you should check that book out and read it yourself, because it's a really interesting story. I hope that sort of briefly explains that, Stephen.
I have a copy of that book. That is a phenomenal book.
It is a fabulous book.
Fabulous book. We've got a couple of questions. Urson from New York City said, can we borrow any digital copies of books?
Not at the moment. We don't have any we don't have any digital books. We don't really have digitized books, period, and we don't have any that are available for borrowing either. So we not at the moment, no.
Okay. Aaron Medician, he said, I have a quick question about using materials. Aaron, why don't you pot up your audio and ask that question?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Thank you. Just really quickly, like there are all these beautiful digital assets that are being created and are available online. Are we able to use those internally, like within our Scottish Rite bodies for education? Are we able to copy them and send them around? I know there are sometimes like sensitive issues involving use and attribution. So I just wanted to ask if, before I start right-clicking on websites and trying to save things or screenshotting.
Sure. It's a good question. So generally speaking, you can use them, I would say. One of the things we tried to do when we made when we decided what to put in the digital collections website was to put stuff that people would have permission to use, that there wouldn't be any rights issues related to them. The one thing that and there is a page on the website, terms of use, that talks about how you can use the material, but generally speaking, unless you're gonna print it on coffee cups and make $1 million off of it, you're mostly fine. And you can always get in touch with us if you're not sure. What the museum and library usually ask for when any of the images are reproduced is that you credit the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. That way people know where this is coming from. And if you're going to publish something, then it's a different story, because we want to make sure that we provide you with a proper credit line, which often includes the name of the person who donated it. So we sort of take that responsibility seriously in terms of making sure that the information that goes out is accurate, and that if someone generously donated something, that we credit them properly. But if this is something that you are throwing together in a PowerPoint and you're going to show your lodge, we're a little less stringent about that, but we're happy to help you get accurate captions for that material. But there's generally speaking, we put high-res images there so that people could download them and use them. So we are happy to have you use it. And like I said, if you have any question as to whether or not you can use something in a certain way, you can just ask us, and we'll let you know, and we can facilitate it if it's possible.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Here's another question. Can we utilize the library and the museum if we're doing genealogy studies of Masons in our family who were in the Scottish Rite, or potentially maybe not? We just want to find out.
Sure, that's a great question. We get that one all the time, as you can imagine. So what we have in terms of it's very much, I wouldn't call it sort of traditional genealogical information, but in terms of Masonic membership, what we have is, in addition to a list of deceased 33rds that gets published in the annual proceedings, we have all those annual returns that I mentioned to you that are from all the valleys. So that goes back into the 19th century, and it goes up through I want to say late 20th century. I might go into the early 21st century. We try to help as much as we can. It's that collection's not indexed, so but oftentimes if someone has a death date and an idea of where the person lived, then a lot of times we can sort of look through a list of names and find someone, and then sometimes go back from that to figure out when they were initiated, potentially. So the answer is it depends. We're always happy to try to help. A lot of times we'll get people that will contact us and they won't know anything about someone's Masonic membership. And so the first thing I have to do is basically send them to the Grand Lodge in the state that the person would have become a Mason, and start there. But we do have those annual return records. So we do technically have this information. Accessing it can be a challenge, but we take the time to do it. And we're, I don't know if I'd say oftentimes, but maybe more often than not, we're able to find something if there's something to find. So
here's another question. Are there any documents or artifacts of Albert Pike's like there are in the Southern Masonic jurisdiction?
There are some. We do have some letters written by Albert Pike. So Albert Pike and Josiah Drummond, who was Josiah Drummond was the Sovereign Grand Commander starting with the Union of 1867. And he and Albert Pike were actually very close friends, and to the point where in 1870, Albert Pike visited the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction's annual meeting, and there was a talk, which obviously did not come to fruition, of the two Supreme Councils uniting at the time. This was right after the Union of 1867, where these competing Supreme Councils in the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction had just united, and Josiah Drummond and Albert Pike were very close, and they talked about, should we, bring our two Supreme Councils together? In the end, they decided not to, but I bring that all up to say, during that time period, mostly 1870s, maybe 1880s, we definitely have some correspondence from Albert Pike. We may have some other Southern jurisdiction documents that are signed by Pike. We don't have compared to the Southern jurisdiction, we do not have very much stuff related to Albert Pike, but we do have some Pike stuff in the collection. Yeah.
That's awesome. So Jeff, I'm gonna take you, give you a minute to take a breath, because this is really a Rich Elliott question. So how can someone or a group support the library and museum? Rich, that's probably a good question for you.
Well, there are a number of different ways that you can support the museum and library. We have a board of directors, which is composed of 15 members. 10 of those members have to be active members of our Supreme Council. 5 of those members can come from outside of our Supreme Council. They don't have to be Scottish Rite members. They can be people from the general public. We are always looking for people that might want to support us in that fashion. Jeff mentioned that the collections, we are always accessioning new material. The staff is always looking for new materials in different ways, whether it's families that just come forward or individuals that come forward and have things that they would like us to consider as part of the collection. There are very simple processes in place that we can start that process if somebody is interested in doing that. So that's a way that people can support also. At the same time, our staff is always looking out for pieces that we can add to the collection that we may have to spend our funds on. We do have a small bit in the budget each year for the staff to try to purchase things that they feel would be valuable to the collection as we go forward. And of course, the biggest way that you can help our museum and library is to support it financially. And there are a number of ways that we can consider that financial support, whatever fashion people would like those funds to go to specifically, we can tailor that. So we're always looking for financial support in any way that we can get it. The museum and library has an annual budget of a little over $3 million that maintains the building and supports all of the staff for the museum and library. It's a pretty tight budget. You can be very, very proud of the building that we have. It's maintained to very high standards, and of course has to have very tight HVAC requirements in order to maintain all of the collection that we have in there as far as humidity and temperature in the building. So it's an expensive building to maintain, but we're very, very proud of the building. We're very, very proud of the collection that we have. And we're proud of the work that the staff does on a daily basis. You've heard a little bit from Jeff here today about what the library people do, the archivists and Jeff as a librarian. But the behind the scenes work that most of these people do is really not recognized. And that's really the nitty gritty, that where we take these pieces that we consider accessioning into the collection, we record those, and they need to be preserved and prepared to be stored in a proper fashion. We record those, take photos of them, put metadata together eventually to be able to share those with the general public on our databases. So it's a pretty involved process, and every member of the staff contributes a little piece to that. So anything that people could do financially to support these endeavors, I think it's very important for Masonry and fraternal organizations as a whole as we go forward. And a lot of history just seems to be, people just want to make up their own stories and erase the history. It's all that much more important what the staff is doing here, so that people will have an accurate and true picture of especially what Masonry is and was, where it came from, and Scottish Rite as well.
That's phenomenal. Rick Powell, you have a question, you said.
I do. Well, let me properly introduce Rich Elliott. He's illustrious Richard Elliott, 33rd degree. He is the executive director for the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library. And Rich, thanks for popping on tonight. We really appreciate your support for Excelsior as well as for Jeff's presentation. You mentioned about a number of fundraising things. Would you mind, since we have you on right now, would you mind telling us about the Hall of Fame and the event tied to it that's coming up in November?
Not at all. Thank you for that, Rick. I'm feeling a little bit left out because I don't have a nice background like all of you guys do with the Excelsior splashed behind me. But no, you guys look great. It's a great program, and I thank you for the opportunity to join today, and thank you for the opportunity to give Jeff this chance to share what we do at the museum and library. I think it's very, very important that you have an understanding of what we do and can convey that message and share that message with your other members. So on November 29th, we have a combined event this year. As you, I hope, are all aware, last year we opened the Hall of Fame exhibit that we have and inducted 10 famous Masons. And this year we'll be adding 5 famous Masons to that, including Harry Houdini, who was mentioned earlier this evening. And we have a special event where we're combining, our charities department is combining Giving Tuesday this year. I assume that some of you have witnessed that before. We have a live stream that we do on Giving Tuesday in order to raise funds for all of our charities. And this year we'll be combining that event. You have an opportunity, if you want to join us for that night, you can actually make a contribution and purchase a table and bring a bunch of guys from New York and join us for that evening. You'll be able to be a part of the induction of the 5 new famous Masons, as well as witness the live stream from the stage in the auditorium at the museum and library. So it'll be a very, very special event.
Great, thank you. I've got one more for Jeff. And you know, Steve kind of jumped ahead of me with the mention of the Franken manuscript. You saw I had the book ready and was holding it up, but I've got another book here that you were involved with from, I think, 2013 called The Sublime Brotherhood. And would you like to tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. So in 2013, it was the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And for that, the Supreme Council wanted to publish a new history, sort of not a completely in-depth history, but a sort of a more popular history that would be accessible to members to learn a little bit more about the history of the organization. And I was one of the people who was involved with the writing of that book, and it was great. When the 200th anniversary was a pretty exciting time, because I think you know, it's even when you're at 197 years, you know, that's one thing. But when you hit 200 years, bicentennial, you know, the organization has been around for a very long time. And so it was great to be involved with that book. There's actually, so there's basically 3 histories of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The first one was done in the 1930s, and that was published by the Supreme Council. It's a 2-volume set. It's a great in-depth history of the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And then in the 1980s, there was a new history that was published, and that is also very good. And then in 2013, this new history was published as well. So I think if you look at all 3 of those as a whole, you can get something different out of all those. So.
Yeah, great, thanks. By the way, brothers, in the chat, I have posted the link to the museum and library as well as the blog. And just a few seconds ago, I put in the link. If you're interested in ordering any of these books that we've talked about, the link is there for the Masonic marketplaces where you can purchase those. Bob, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple more.
Okay.
Is there a writer in residency program or a researcher in residency program at the library and museum?
There is not. Not at the moment, and I don't know that we've had anything like that in the past. I'm not familiar with a program like that, so not that I'm familiar with. No.
Yeah, no problem. Bill Nugent wants to know, could you either tell him a book that he could buy and start to read? Or is there a copy of a book that helps someone on a local level talk about preserving documents and pictures?
I think starting with the Caring for Your Masonic Treasures booklet that I talked about is a good place to start. That booklet points you to more resources. So essentially, if that's not in depth enough, or if you're specifically interested, let's say, in photographs rather than books or documents, there's sort of a, I don't know if I'd call it a bibliography exactly, but there's a list of resources that you can follow up on that will guide you to more. So if you reach out to me, I'd be happy to send that along to you, because I do think it's a good place to start. It's relatively straightforward, and it points you to lots of resources that are more in depth than the booklet can get into.
Awesome. Last question. What does it cost to visit the library and museum and Hall of Fame?
Well, nothing at all, but we are happy to have people make contributions. There's free admission and free parking for the museum. You can make a donation, but there is no admission charge for the museum, and certainly not for the library either. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I'll add to that, if I may.
Please.
And this is another fashion in which you can support our museum and library. If you join at the contributor level, which is $100 level, you can support our museum and library, and that also gives you the opportunity to belong to the North American Reciprocal Museum Association, which gives you free access to over 500 other facilities across the country. So and I will also add that if you have a small group or a large group for that matter, but if we do special tours, we can accommodate small groups, but we'll welcome any size group, of course, to the museum and library. But if it's a smaller group and we have staff in the building and can make the arrangements and the accommodations, we're certainly willing and we're capable of showing those small groups the 3 vaults that we have in the basement level there. And that's really where you'll get to see the assets that aren't out to the public every single day. And, you could get a special glimpse of how we store those documents, where the archives are, where Jeff works from. We have rolling racks in there, which provides us extra storage for those documents. They're all specially packaged and preserved and with their own separate storage spaces. And it's quite fascinating to spend a few minutes with Jeff and have him go over to the rack and pull out one of these important documents that he shared with you earlier and lay it on the table, and you can see it firsthand. So, and it's hard to imagine that somebody over 200 years ago sat down and penned these things, and we have it in our possession. It's a part of our history, and we can share it with you.
Oh, that's amazing. Dave Barnes says, I have used the reciprocal membership a couple of times. Great benefits. So you got a tremendous disciple in him with the reciprocal membership. So that's really good. That's excellent. Got a thumbs up as well. Rick, that's all the questions that I've got in chat and that have been sent to me personally. I'll turn it back to you. But Jeff, hey, thanks very much. Great job.
All right. Thanks, Bob. At this point, I'd like to thank Jeff and Rich for hopping on and adding to Jeff's presentation. Jeff, great presentation. I think our museum and library is one of the real gems that the Northern Masonic jurisdiction has to offer. And if anybody's ever in the Boston area, please make a trip. I know there have been valleys here in the state of New York that have actually done an occasional bus trip out to Lexington and spent a day at the library and the museum. So I would highly recommend it. So again, Jeff, thank you very much. Rich, thanks for hopping on as well.
Thanks for spending time with XLCR 32. The experiences, comments, opinions, and views shared on this program are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, Concordant, or Pendant body. Until we meet again, keep on reaching higher.